Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Saboor Sakhizada, a scholar and an Afghan. He was born in Afghanistan and he completed his high school in Kabul. At 17, he joined the US mission and worked alongside American troops. He contributed to counter-insurgency efforts in his country. In 2014, he immigrated to the US. He is currently in Syracuse, New York. He also did his bachelor's and master's from Syracuse University. Today, we are going to talk about his homeland, his country, Afghanistan. Saboor, can you tell us what's happening? And let's start with the headlines. Taliban and Pakistani troops have clashed again. This is over the Durand Line. What's really happening? Why is the Durand Line so contentious between both sides?
Yeah, Rohan, thank you so much for having me. What we're seeing unfold in Afghanistan, the tragedies, is just a visible tip of a much deeper problem. Pakistan, as you say, as you've read, are saying that they targeting militant groups that have launched attack from Afghan territory, especially the TTP, the Taliban-Pakistan. But beneath these headlines, beneath what we're seeing today, lies a very dangerous cycle, on both sides, and they're fundamentally trapped into this mutual suspicion that exists among these two parties, two nations, two countries. And what the world isn't seeing, and what we're trying to understand about these tragedies that are unfolding, the tensions, is fueled by the growing network of militant groups in Afghanistan. Right, the Taliban took over in 2021, created a condition for those groups, militant groups, especially the TTP, for example, to regroup, recruit, and expand their reach. So what we're seeing with these clashes that are framed as border fights kind of reflects a broader security vacuum and a competing narrative on both sides of the border. Like Taliban says that Pakistan is violating the sovereignty, and therefore they have the legitimate right to retaliate. And on the other hand, you can see that Pakistan saying that we are kind of targeting these militant groups that are a threat to us, to our existence. So it's a much deeper issue, and it kind of goes into, as you said, the Durand Line, something that has historically not been recognized by the Afghans. It's a colonial border, right? It's a colonial era trouble that was created at the time. And so that's what we're seeing, is that this dispute, this cycle of tension that's constantly growing between those two parties.
Right. Can you tell us more about the Durand Line and how successive Afghan governments and powers that have been in Afghanistan, Afghanistan has been independent for years, and no matter who was in Kabul, they've never really recognized the Durand Line. However, Pakistan feels the other way. So who's really right and who's really wrong here?
Yeah, I mean, for that, you have to go back into history, right? But essentially, a lot of these tensions that we see between the Durand Line is the posts, the patrols that are taking place, the jurisdictions that date back into decades. And what we're seeing with each of these disputes that are happening, they're very localized, because what you're doing is that these lines have been created separating tribes, separating families. And where for these people that have lived there for years and years and years, nothing like this existed. And so when you create a line like this, it separates family, gives them different identity, gives them different motives. And so, when you're looking at these tensions over posts, jurisdictions, violation of, for example, this line and these territories, creates a cycle of retaliation among both of the parties, because now you have a piece of land that you want to defend. Now you have a people and responsibility to protect on both sides of the line. But historically, as you said, even though this kind of plays in favor of Pakistan itself, Afghans have never truly accepted this line because, you can go back into even before the 1947, the creation of the state of Pakistan and all of that, because, Afghanistan used to be a much bigger, and you take a look at the Waziristan area. And so, but so that's where the challenge is, and the disputes have been coming. So rather than these two countries coming to a place where they are having a dialogue over their challenges and the disagreements that they have, and creating conditions for economic prosperity, family unifications, and among the cohesion of the tribes and families, it kind of fuels the opposite. It fuels the retaliation or the conflict in the opposite directions. And it's no good for any of the parties, because as you can see that these things could easily spill over to other areas. We talked about how this is a regional threat, but for both for Pakistan and Afghanistan, and militant groups kind of taking this as an opportunity and cultivating their ideologies and seeds among these groups, but also economically, socially, and culturally. This kind of separates families, and it's a deeper challenge for a lot of the families that live every single day in that area.
So we are actually right, because it is spreading. The clashes are spreading, and let me just give you a short chronology of what's really happened. So Pakistan used fighter jets to bomb Kabul, and they claim that they neutralized TTP leadership. In return, the Taliban in Afghanistan, they launched cross-border attacks, and of course it wasn't just cross-border, but they captured several Pakistani troops. They captured several Pakistani posts. And then there was like a short truce, a short ceasefire. And this was after Gulf nations like Khattar, UAE, and Saudi Arabia issued condemnations. They called for an immediate ceasefire, and that did happen. But today, there are reports that Pakistan has again used its air force, this time striking not Kabul, but Kandahar. And in return, the Taliban have basically increased the area where they were carrying out attacks. So it is spreading. You're absolutely correct. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think this is going to lead into a much larger border skirmish, which is going to be very difficult to de-escalate from?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think this you have to look at it from a historical standpoint. This is nothing new. For a lot of the families that are caught in between this struggle, and not just speaking on the border itself, is almost like a deja vu. It's a feeling that they have had, that they're going through every single day. But when you're looking at it in terms of balance of power, the Taliban regime is no match for what the nuclear power like Pakistan has in terms of its capabilities, in terms of its military strengths. And so there is no balance. And I don't think, yes, there are small little instances of pockets of fighting that you could see happening at the border, and Taliban responds back in some way, shape, or form, or takes, I should say, prisoners of war, or perhaps hostages in some sense, or from both military and civilian side, and just creates a condition that they're trying to respond back, because ultimately they have a responsibility, as they say, to, some way, shape, or form to the people of Afghanistan as the leading group leading Afghanistan and is speaking on behalf of Afghan people. But it's a challenge that you say that if the regional powers, for example, India, for example, Iran, and other Gulf states in the area are paying attention, because it could easily de-escalate. It could easily escalate to a point becoming a much, much deeper challenge for the region, but also, potentially, allowing Pakistan has a reputation to uphold, because if it shows its weakness being a nuclear power in that region, it currently creates a space for other parties, other states to think that maybe Pakistan is not as strong to fight against a small militant group, or perhaps a group that are threatening them. So it creates a condition of ambiguity and questions the legitimacy of state of Pakistan and its ability to control. But at the same time, you could see the same thing happening for the Pakistan, because they're on the chase for being recognized, for showing that they could do, that they could deliver, that they could defend, that they could respond to threats, and they could walk into negotiations and diplomatic relations, political negotiation type of a thing, that they can do this type of thing. So it's a very unique opportunity and challenge at the same time for both of the states and for the group as Taliban leading Afghanistan.
Let's talk about the timing of these clashes, and because there is a lot to uncover here. The airstrikes that Pakistan conducted actually came at a time when Taliban's acting foreign minister Mutaki was in India. He still is in India. He's leaving today. So clearly they were intentional. They were made sure that a message was sent. What really do you think Islamabad is trying to do? Do you think they're trying to basically send a message to Kabul and New Delhi that this embrace, or what appears to be an embrace, will not be welcomed by Pakistan?
Yeah, what the context is very important. What you just said, Amir Khan Muttaqi, the foreign minister of the Taliban, you just came back from a foreign visit to Russia, and now he's going into India, and at the same time, you can see. So timing is very symbolic in that sense. Taliban have been on a quiet but a determined campaign to gain legitimacy on the world stage, and India, as a major regional power, is a key part in that effort. Right, you can see one of the first high-level visits to India since 2021. The message in my mind, or the message the way I see it, is very clear. Kabul is diversifying its relationship. It's going beyond its, what it currently has within itself. With tensions running high with Pakistan, for example, the Taliban are exploring new economic trades, diplomatic relationships, for example, trades with mining, for example, connectivity, that's another example of it. Even expanding flight routes or routes from Kabul to India. Being a landlocked country like Afghanistan, you're constantly not only dependent on neighbors to allow trade and allow goods to go back and forth, but you're trying to diversify it so you're not solely dependent on one nation to allow it to happen. So, and we know the whole saying of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and so in that sense, Taliban and Pakistan and India is a unique dynamic that constantly evolves, and I think Taliban are trying to take advantage of it, saying that if you do not stop, or the aggression that is being taking place do not stop, we have someone we could go through, and is stronger in the region, and is also nuclear powered, and so it's a unique timing, but Pakistan is clearly sending a message that you're not as strong. We still control the air and the land, at least in the areas where the borders are. But it's a much, much bigger shift in how geopolitical aspect and the factors that play a role in allowing Taliban to seek new partnership, new allyship, to be able to put pressure on the Pakistan government to kind of de-escalate and show that they still have allies that can support them. But I think fundamentally, not only from a timeline standpoint, it being very symbolic, Taliban are determined and are campaigning for this unique opportunity to be, established a government, or kind of gain the legitimacy that they need at the world stage.
Right. Saboor, let's talk a little bit more about that, especially when it comes to India. So India and Afghanistan have a very, I would say, positive relationship. At least when it comes to people ties, there is a lot of bonhomie, there is a lot of acceptance. There are a lot of Afghans who live in India. There are a lot of Afghan students who study in India, and they graduate, they end up even doing business in India. 100%. India in Afghanistan has played a very different role compared to the other powers that have tried to have an influence in the region. India has helped with the parliament, with the Selma Dam, and of course a lot of connectivity projects. But India was always nervous of what actually happened in 2021 was that the Taliban coming to power, because now New Delhi is stuck in a conundrum. They're not sure how to deal with an organization that they once did label as a terrorist organization. And Taliban are now in power. And of course, the foreign minister is in India. It's a very major shift in how New Delhi looked at Taliban. What do you think is happening? As an Afghan yourself, are you happy with this? Are you nervous? Or do you think India is just trying to find a way to get back in touch with the Afghan people, even if it is through Taliban?
So I'm going to put the question about, whether or not India is negotiating or coming in partnership with the right group as an aside for a minute. But I think you said it, the relationship in terms of, socially, culturally, look at the impact of Bollywood in Afghanistan, right? And so that relationship has always been very strong. Even you can go back into 1919 when the King Amanullah Khan, when he visited, when he went to exile, one of the first countries he visited was India. But when you think about that, I think so that relationship between publics, ordinary Afghans and Indians, are very strong. When you're talking about building a partnership and recognizing a group that is not democratic, that majority of the Afghans do not accept, that are not well represented a representative of the people of Afghanistan, it provides a unique challenge, right? Because then you are trying to talk to an insurgency group that is by force taking over the country and the people's will. So India hasn't formally recognized the Taliban. Let me also just say this. I mean, obviously, you can see Amir Khan Muttaqi, who said, we want this, even in his recent visit, he talked about how he doesn't want the 2008 embassy bombing that happened of Indian embassy in Kabul. He doesn't want that. He will never allow that to happen. But who is there to guarantee that, right? A group that is struggling not only internally but trying to still fight out in the north, and they're still seeing a lot of we saw Ayman al-Zawahiri who got who was found safe haven there, and so who is it to guarantee that? India hasn't formally recognized the Taliban, but its actions suggest that they're sort of gradual normalization, that there is a gradual normalization. The fact that there was a public welcoming to Muttaqi in India, a warm welcoming. He met with Afghan Hindu and Sikh communities that were also Afghans, is speaking about protecting the religious rights, right? The religious sites in Afghanistan and Kabul. India has hinted into establishing its government again in Kabul, not government, the embassy itself in Kabul. Why we don't see that there's not a formal recognition. It certainly gives the Taliban a measure of de facto legitimacy, if you will, right? Because at least in the regional diplomacy sense, India may be trying to, balance its principle with pragmatism, staying engaged without endorsing the regimes outright, right? So I think that's one of the key elements in this relationship. India is taking a very cautious steps. I mean, not long ago, the tension between India and Pakistan was, the fighting that occurred. It's also an opportunity for the Taliban to respond to, for the India to respond to send a message to the Pakistanis in a sense. So it's a unique dynamics that is constantly evolving, and the opportunities there for each of these three parties is quite different because each are kind of have their own sort of priorities that they want to chase and want, but I think nevertheless than anything aside from India and Pakistan, it's Taliban are definitely trying to establish themselves as a regional power, trying to establish their government, but from a public standpoint, as you said, the roots go very deep in terms of the relationship between Afghans and Indians. having a strong bond culturally, socially, and Afghans will forever be grateful for the number of refugees and students that go to India for education, for economic opportunities, for using India as safe haven, just safe place to stay while there's crisis unfolding in Kabul. And so those kind of relationship is I am so grateful that there are opportunities for Afghans to be able to knock on the neighbor's door and see a helping hand.
Right. Saboor, so India is basically being cautious, and it's still measuring the temperature in the room, I should say. But on the other hand, we've got the country you're in, United States. President Donald Trump says he wants America to have control of Bagram Airbase again. You've served with the US military, you've seen action on ground. Is this a good idea? American troops back in Afghanistan with Taliban in power?
Yeah. Well, you can see that even global powers like United States still see the importance, the geopolitical importance of Afghanistan in that region particularly. For me personally, it's a mixed emotion and irony, right? I spent some of my formative years working alongside American troops who believed they were helping build a new Afghanistan, right? To hear talks about returning to background feels like we're opening an old chapter that, for me at least, was never closed. For Afghans who've lived through 2 decades of war, the retaking of Bagram is just not just about a strategy. It's a reminder of what we lost, the promises that were made, and the lives that were changed forever. And so I welcome that opportunity. I think fundamentally, Taliban are not capable of taking advantage of the Bagram airfield, knowing where they are. They don't have the capabilities. They don't have the right. And I'm not trying to invite another foreign nation to immediately go into Afghanistan, but I think there's mutual benefits for not only the United States, but also the region, for the Afghan people, but also in the region, broadly speaking, the region as well. Because having the protection of a global power helps, things like what we're seeing with clashes between between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Right. So Trump basically says that Bagram is important for the US because it would help them basically keep an eye on China and, of course, Iran. So strategically, Bagram is it has always been very important, if I should say. Now, let's come to the Taliban. They have said that they're open to business, but not bases. But do you think somewhere down the line, they may be open to cutting a deal with Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think the environment even in Afghanistan is evolving, right? I mean, who were to say that a Taliban or a popular group, had there been an alternative instead of Taliban right now in that region, in that country, could it be a possibility that there would be another group, another legitimate group that could potentially take over? Bagram has always been more than air base. I mean, you can go back into as far as the Alexander the Great. You can go back into the 1979 to 1989 when that was one of the major hubs, and the Russians and the USSR that was in Afghanistan, right? It's a strategic perch at the heart of Asia, about 65 kilometers away from the capital, the Kabul. It sits between regional powers at the center of it, Iran on the west, right? China on the east, Pakistan and India in the south, and Russia spheres over influence in the north. It's a unique it's a unique place. For United States, controlling Bagram would remain, kind of provide them the opportunity to regain a unique vantage point to monitor, to kind of provide some form of stability and checks and balances, to project power, right? Every major competitor in that region, imposes its will. But having a global power like United States be there not only serves the Afghans in the form of protection, but I think it it serves, it provides some form of stability in the region, and at least from a United States perspective, it kind of gets them into very close to their, I should say, competitors in the world stage, that they could get to them within hours. The Gulf doesn't provide that much connection. I think Bagram uniquely provides that space. They could get into north, they can go into east and west so easily, and they could keep a closer eye on their competitors.
Well, the last time the Americans were in Bagram was in 2021, and the exit was extremely chaotic. Unfortunately, the world has kind of forgotten Afghanistan after the American exit. Media coverage has plummeted, and of course, that's got a lot to do with Taliban being in power, because they are not open to dialogue and to free press. Even recently, Western mainstream media did not cover clashes between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was very rarely covered. Saboor, my final question to you is on this. Do you think the silence that has basically blanketed Afghanistan since 2021 hurts more than the years of war?
I mean, the short answer is yes. You talk to anybody who put sweat and tears into Afghanistan. I desperately wanted to see my sisters go to education, pursue educations in fields that deemed impossible before the United States, came to Afghanistan. You talk to U.S. veterans, Afghan veterans, and they, what they're seeing. For me, at least, personally speaking, the silence cuts a deeper, right? During the war, at least, Afghanistan was part of a global conversation. People paid attention to what was happening. But now the suffering continues in silence, and that cuts deep. Repression, forced displacement of people, the atrocities taking place in the north, a systematic erosion of women from public life. These are some serious matters. These are some beyond what we're seeing, and I think global superpowers have a responsibility to be able to protect humanity and human beings, fellow human beings that are suffering. In other corners of the world. I think that's a responsibility that we have towards Afghans, and I'm a little biased in saying that because that's my homeland. That's where I was, spent 24 years of my life, and as a 17-year-old, I joined in like anyone else to bring peace and to bring prosperity, to bring good to Afghanistan, and establish a government that is the will of its people and is serving and providing resources. When the world looks away in instances like this, it allows injustice to grow unchecked, right? For many Afghans, it feels like being trapped in a story everyone else has stopped reading. It's just painful to be part of that story. And so I just hope that the opportunity for global attention, the lights coming back into Afghanistan, they don't forget that what Afghans are going through, beyond the geopolitical strategic importance of Bagram Airfield, that there's a collective body of people that live there in suffering, and that there are girls that are not going to schools, that there are still people being brainwashed into blowing themselves up into suicide bombers, that's a much deeper challenge that we need to face. And I think we could fix it, but by just making sure that we fulfill our responsibilities and our obligation towards not only people in Afghanistan, but globally. This is the responsibility as a collective community of states and nations that we have towards one another to be able to do that. And yes, for me, seeing what happened and not seeing my home country, the atrocities that are unfolding, whether that's because the media in Afghanistan and Kabul are kind of being checked by this group of people that are not reporting what's happening, the realities of the ground, or simply just the world not bringing the atrocities and the injustices that are taking place at the global attention, it just cuts a lot deep for me.
Right, Saboor. Ever since, I would say, the great game, Afghanistan has been turned into nothing but a battleground. for major world powers and somehow it still carries on. It seems like a never-ending cycle. You've spoken about you as a 17-year-old Afghan jumping into the muck and the thick and thin of basically violence. My final question is, what is your message to a young Afghan who's probably watching us right now? What do you want to tell them that maybe nobody was there to tell you when you were 17?
Yeah, I mean, so I came in as a 17-year-old. I went to school. I think a portion of the responsibility itself lie on the Afghans themselves, right? Being able to stand up for their rights, being able to prioritize what matters to them as collectively, prioritize education to make sure that they are educated and they can, provide better leaders, better future leaders for the Afghanistan, and to be able to voice out their opinions, to record the atrocities that are taking place, whether that's towards women or minorities, to be able to not allow and be able to speak up when their homes and their communities are being used as terrorist safe havens. We have been through a lot, as you said. I often describe myself as a child of war. I grew up in the 1990s, and you look at what happened, during that time up until 2001 and beyond. From 2001 up until I immigrated to the States, I had seen nothing but war. And so I don't wish that. I don't wish that for anybody. And I know the challenges I went through, the type of schools that I went to study, which were not favorable. I don't wish that for anybody. And I think, aside from the responsibility of global leaders and international community towards Afghanistan, I think Afghans themselves have a responsibility for themselves. And it's time for them to take ownership, and the time for them to take control of their own affairs. And I think they do that by playing very smart, by prioritizing what matters to the nation, education, making sure that they cultivate the right seeds, rather than just going in the opposite direction of what the global order is going through. So I hope I'm answering that questions, but it's very challenging, especially when the dynamics are shifting on the daily basis, and then you have how could you think about prosperity, future, and doing good and innovation, for example, or entrepreneurship, for example, when you don't have food on the table? When your belly is empty, the first thing that comes to mind is not innovation and entrepreneurship and business and trade. The first thing that comes to mind is food, bread on the table. And so it's a very, very challenging environment to be in. And I see the challenge in front of me. I see the families that are living there, and my own relatives that are there that are struggling on the daily basis. So it's a very challenging environment, and I think that it could be addressed by global pressure, or by United States in particularly, to make sure that the groups like the Taliban are held accountable for their actions, and are not supported or not applauded, and then making sure that they represent the will of its people.
Thank you, Saboor, for talking to us about what's happening in Afghanistan. Of course, the clashes with Pakistan and India, basically opening the door to Taliban to at least begin conversations. But there's a lot to unpack of what really is going on in Afghanistan, and I think more voices from Afghanistan can really, bring back light and spotlight to the region, because if it's not for people like us talking, it's very difficult to get a sense of what really is going down in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for speaking to Fed Observer.
Rohan, thank you so much. You said it. It's time for every single Afghan to speak up, to document, to share their stories, to see the atrocities that are happening. Because unless we don't tell our own story, no one will. The silence and injustice will continue to live unchecked, and the world will not attention. Just because there's a lot more happening in the world are going to get attention, and those parts of the world are going to get attention. But Afghanistan, as history has proven over and over again, Afghanistan is going to continue to play an importance in that region, in Asia, in Central Asia, in that particular part of the planet we live. And so I hope that the world, turns its aperture towards that and pays attention to some of the things that are happening in Afghanistan. So thank you for giving me the space to speak up.
Thank you, Saboor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, sir.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.